Good evening, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting us to come before you and earn your support. My name is Perla Cavazos. I'm running for Austin City Council, Place 1, and I'm here to ask for your vote. I've been here in Austin 11 years. I'm originally from a small border town, the Rio Grande Valley, where my brother and my sister and I were raised by our grandparents because our parents passed away at a very young age. So my grandparents, after having raised their own, took the three of us in, and we were raised in the family restaurant. Every day after school, that was our childcare. I learned a really important value from my grandmother that I like to talk about, that it's not about the success of the individual, it's about the success of the family, it's about the success of the community. And that's something that I have carried close to my heart in everything I do, the education I've gotten, and in the activities that I volunteered in. I have a undergraduate degree from Stanford University in the LBJ School of Public Affairs. I've got 10 years of public policy experience working in affordable housing, working in education, business and economic development, and some tax policy as well. And have served here in the community on the city's planning commission, where I got to know many of you. And have also served on the Commission for Women, have been very active in the cultural arts, and am a past president of the Austin Women's Political Caucus as well. And three of the issues that I'm primarily interested in pursuing, and the reason that I'm running, is because I want to ensure that families and individuals are assisted, especially during this economic downturn, that we have real solutions to help families stay in their homes, pay their bills. I'm looking at ways that our city could expand public-private partnerships to increase financial literacy and debt counseling. I'm really interested in increasing the city's role in small business lending and capacity building. I think it's really important to strengthen our small business community. Is that my 2 minutes? Okay, well, I really appreciate your support. Thank you.
Chris Riley.
Evening. It's so good to be here. I am Chris Riley, and I'm also running for Place 1 in the Austin City Council. I was born and raised here in Austin. I grew up going to Austin public schools, went away for college and came back for UT Law School, worked as a lawyer for about 17 years, starting off with 5 years at the Texas Supreme Court, and then worked at a firm downtown for about 12 years. During the last 12 or 15 years, I started getting more and more involved in city stuff. I started off by forming a neighborhood association in my neighborhood. When I first moved downtown about 20 years ago, there wasn't much of a neighborhood downtown. The population had dwindled to the point of being almost non-existent. So those of us that were there, we wanted to get involved in issues that affected downtown living. We got together and started what became the Downtown Austin Neighborhood Association. I served as its president for 5 years. I was a member of the Austin Neighborhoods Council during that time, and worked actively both with people in my own neighborhood and with folks on the ANC in dealing with issues affecting neighborhoods all over the place. After serving as president of the Neighborhood Association for 5 years, I got appointed to the Planning Commission. I served on the Planning Commission for 6 years, chaired it for 2 years. I also served on the Downtown Commission for 8 years and chaired it for 2 years, and on a number of other city boards and task forces. I also did a lot of nonprofit work. In addition to my neighborhood work, I helped start a group called Austin Car Share to help people reduce their dependence on cars, which has been useful to me. I don't actually own a car right now, but during the campaign, it's been great actually being able to get around to outlying places using Austin Car Share. I also helped start a group called the Alliance for Public Transit. I served as president of the Austin History Center Association. I served on the board of the Austin Parks Foundation and on a number of other nonprofit boards. I've enjoyed all of that work, and what I've most enjoyed is working with folks like you on issues affecting the whole city. We have a tremendous amount of talent and energy and compassion in the city, and I really enjoy working with folks to harness that energy and see what we can do to work cooperatively to address the serious problems facing our city. So I'm glad to be here tonight and pursue that conversation a little further. Thanks.
Thank you. Ms. Cavazos.
Yes.
Both the APD Community Liaison and the APD District Representative programs are extremely valuable to neighborhoods. They provide mechanisms for citizens to collaborate with the city and APD to prevent and reduce crime, to identify and address systemic causes of crime in the community. The APD Community Liaison Unit has been targeted for dismantling, and the District Representative Program may be threatened with reductions as well. In this time of economic hardship, when crime rates are likely to increase, does it make sense to you to try to end or diminish these programs? Will you commit to protect these programs from budget cuts?
I don't think now is the time to dismantle these programs. I agree with you, especially during tough economic times. You tend to see a spike in crime, and now more than ever we need to ensure a stable level of public safety in our neighborhoods. And I really do appreciate going to neighborhood association meetings and seeing your local, your district rep there, police district rep there. I think it builds trust in the community. I think it's an opportunity to to listen to specifically what neighborhood concerns are in the areas of crime, and to have a more focused approach to how you address crimes in neighborhoods, specific and unique to that neighborhood. So I do not believe now is the time to start dismantling that program, and I really would like to find ways to preserve that program.
So you commit to protect those two programs?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Austin has been allocated $1.7 million in federal stimulus funds through the Justice Assistance Grant Program to prevent and control crime and improve the criminal justice system. The funds may be used for a broad range of activities, including to put more officers on the streets, to purchase additional tools and equipment necessary to fight crime, and to fund various programs, including drug treatment and enforcement. How do you think these funds could best be used to address Austin's rising crime rate?
It's a good question, and I was we were over in the Metropolis Neighborhood Association meeting on Saturday, and really hearing from the community about their specific concerns with crime and drug activity. I think this is really good news that we've tapped into these stimulus funds. I think, for example, preserving our district representatives would be a good program to use some of this funding for. I think we need to look specifically on issues of training within our police force to make sure that they are aware of our unique neighborhood needs and cultural sensitivity as well. That they are well trained in the use of enforcement, and so I'm really want to ensure that we use those funds appropriately to make sure we stabilize public safety throughout our neighborhoods.
Given your background with the legislature, you're in a strong position to work to improve the city's relationship with other governmental bodies. What is wrong with the city's relationship with the state legislature, and how do we fix it? How would you work with other jurisdictions, such as the state, Travis County, LCRA, Texas Parks and Wildlife, the school district, and others?
Well, one of the most valuable lessons I learned at the state legislature is the importance of collaborative work. You can have a great idea, but unless you're speaking to all the stakeholders, bringing in all the involved parties, then you're not going to be able to move forward your positive policy agenda. And so, yes, working at the state legislature, Austin had a certain reputation, I guess you could say confrontational reputation with our state legislature, because we are, we tend to be, I think, progressive, the most progressive city in the state, and green friendly, neighborhood friendly, and so I know there's efforts of the legislature to try to preempt some of this legislation from coming forward. Inclusionary zoning was one I know that went through because of the possibility of that going through here in Austin, and I worked with my senator to try to stop that from happening. But I'm really, because of my work there, I'm collaborative. Thanks.
All right. In addition to using an assessment tool that would take into consideration the financial impact of upzonings, you said we should also consider other tools to keep property taxes low. What other tools should be used to stabilize property taxes?
And this is an area that I worked on extensively at the state legislature, was property taxes, because I did education, public school finance, and we all know school taxes is the biggest part of our property tax. I have two ideas. First of all, I think to the extent that we could craft a homestead exemption that recognizes low-income households that have been living in, historically, living here in Austin for 20 years or more, to give them some property tax relief. Another example of something that I'd like to see move forward is House Bill 866 by Representative Mike Villarreal. Senator Watson is a sponsor in the Senate, and this would allow for a property tax circuit breaker. Once your property tax reaches a certain percentage of your income, it would stop, and you couldn't be taxed higher than that. I think we need to take advantage of tools like these to provide some property tax relief.
You've represented to ANC that you will support codifying and reinstating the maximum height limits from the 1986 Waterfront Overlay Ordinance and will oppose any rezonings violating that intent. Quick question. Will you support codifying the maximum height limits so they apply to PUD districts and planned development area combining districts? Yes or no?
I think some of these, definitely on the waterfront overlay.
First, a yes or no?
I would probably have to say no, just because I believe that some of these cases are better considered on a case-by-case basis. And, there's sometimes specific circumstances where the neighborhood might be in favor of some of these, or we need to look at the increased, what is the community impact at large. And so I think cases like this are better considered on a case-by-case basis.
The next part of that question is, a specific example, the Lakeshore Subdistrict of the Waterfront Overlay had a maximum height of 60 feet. Will you oppose granting heights above 60 feet for the portion of the South Shore District PUD that is in the Lakeshore Subdistrict of the Waterfront Overlay?
Yes.
Thank you. Do you believe the city should commit to a level of affordable housing at the future green water treatment plant development? If so, that's a yes?
Yes.
What affordability level would be your goal for that project?
Well, on publicly owned lands such as green, I'd like to see a higher level of affordability than, for example, on VMUs. I think something closer to the realm of 25% would be more appropriate. I think we're more able to afford that because it is publicly owned lands, and we should take advantage of that.
In your questionnaire responses, you indicate that in a long-range comprehensive planning process, we can appropriately address expanding existing entertainment districts without polluting established neighborhoods with noise. How would you propose expanding entertainment districts into neighborhoods without impacting quality of life in those neighborhoods? And do you believe that an entertainment district would work well in your neighborhood?
In Chestnut neighborhood, already there is. Well, I first of all support the recommendations of the Live Music Task Force to look at ways to support our music venues in being up to having double paned windows, and just looking at ways that we can preserve the live music culture here in Austin. I think that's really important to our economy, but do it in a way that is respectful of neighborhoods. I think it's really important that we try to cooperate, and from what I understand, the Live Music Task Force although it got off to a rocky start, I think they did a really good job of coming up with some recommendations that I think would be good to move forward and implement. On my neighborhood, what was the question?
Do you believe an entertainment district would work well in your neighborhood?
Probably not. It's a residential neighborhood. I live in the Chestnut neighborhood, although somebody does play their music loudly on the weekends. I don't know who that is.
In some of the responses of the candidates to various questionnaires, it has become clear that there's a concern among Planning Commission members and City Council members that they often are not sure that the groups of citizens who appear before them truly represent the will of the neighborhoods being affected by their decisions. Was this ever a concern of yours while you served on the Planning Commission? First, yes or no?
Yes.
In the absence of a clear desire laid out in a neighborhood plan, what steps did you take to ensure you were voting in favor of the will of the respective neighborhoods?
Well, I think in some neighborhoods you had different neighborhood associations, and I think it was important to be open and responsive to both groups. I think everyone has a valid opinion and adds value to a neighborhood plan, so I think it was important to respect all values. But also just keep in mind consideration of what the impact is going to be to the community at large or the neighborhood at large. I think that's just also trying to balance the views and try to discern whether these are true neighborhood values or certain neighborhoods might be, opposing a certain zoning. I mean, you have to kind of look at the big picture and what might be some of the underlying reasons for opposing the zoning. It's a bit of a delicate matter, but you have to really listen and take all perspectives into mind and just look at the impact to the community at large as well.
If you are elected to City Council, what changes would you make to clarify the representative nature of neighborhoods when they seek favorable decisions from the City Council?
Okay, can you elaborate on that a little bit?
How would you clarify who represents the neighborhood when you have different groups who claim to represent the will of the neighborhood? How would you clarify their representative ability?
I think that it's important to have a diverse representation in our neighborhood groups, that you have people that are active and committed, meeting regularly from different blocks or sectors throughout the neighborhood. I think that's going to ensure that you maximize the representation and the opinions of the neighborhood. And I think that's something that should be taken into consideration when making decisions at City Council.
How will bringing a medical school to Austin help increase the revenue side of the budget? In addition to the potential for increased jobs, what other benefits do you believe a medical school could provide for the citizens of Austin?
Well, this is one policy idea that I'm really interested in moving forward, bringing a medical school here to Austin. I think first and foremost, it's going to increase access to health care. 25% of our population here is underinsured or uninsured, so I absolutely believe that it's going to increase access to health care, and that's going to be a benefit to our community and alleviate some of the burden to our budget. I think we're going to see some services increase, like psychiatric services, which we are lacking in our community. And then secondly, yes, it is creating jobs, and we're also going to have what we can expect as spin-off industries like biotech and medical research that are really going to make Austin a leader in economic development.
In the next 10 seconds, I want to redirect you. How is a medical school going to help increase the revenue side of our budget?
It's going to create jobs. It's going to alleviate their budget on public services. For example, I mentioned psychiatric services. If we have a residency program in psychiatry, then, for example, our homeless population, that is one of the concerns, is that the homelessness problem in our community is there is a lack of mental and psychiatric services. So even just by providing that service to the community, that's something that's going to provide a relief on our city's budget, human services budget.
I didn't hear revenue. Did you say anything about revenue?
It's going to free up revenue.
Okay, thank you. If the question of subsidies for a high-end shopping mall came up today, how would you handle it?
If a high-end subsidies?
It's a question. Subsidies for a high-end shopping mall. How would you handle it?
Well, I would probably be very concerned about it and likely to be opposed to it. I supported Proposition 2, and I'm really concerned when we invest tax subsidies in retail, especially high-end. I'd prefer to see an investment in our local business.
Since only 2 of the 4 positions have been filled for neighborhood advisor, with a city population of almost 800,000 people, how would you envision those 2 representatives splitting their responsibilities in order to maximize their effectiveness to neighborhoods?
Good question, and I know that's probably still trying to be formed right now. We could have one be an ombudsman for neighborhoods that have established neighborhoods, and then one be an ombudsman person for neighborhoods that haven't gone through the neighborhood planning process. Although whoever that is, it'd probably be a bit more work and educating and working with those neighborhoods that haven't gone through the planning process.
If you're elected to City Council, how will you ensure that your appointees are truly qualified for the positions on boards and commissions and are not simply political appointments?
That's a good question, and that's something that's really important to me, is ensuring that we have diversity among our boards and commissions, not just ethnic diversity, but also just experience that's relevant to the Planning Commission. I think we have to balance, when you make an appointment, for example, I would take into consideration what is the expertise already on that commission and what's lacking. I think that's something that maybe we could establish some guidelines, the balance of each board and commission, that there's, business, neighborhood, gender diversity, and difference. I think when making appointments, all these factors should be taken into consideration.
How do your budget priorities differ from your opponents?
My budget priorities are, first and foremost, I believe that we need to ensure that we're not balancing the budget on the backs of our most vulnerable population, especially during this economic downturn. Austin is already very expensive to live in, so I believe that during this economic downturn it's going to be even worse. And if we need to find cost savings, we shouldn't be doing it by taking services away from our most vulnerable. Secondly, I do believe it's important to maintain a stable quality of public safety, and I do believe that's very essential, especially during the tough economic times, to take that into consideration, that crime will increase. And thirdly, I would like to see more of a balance towards our small business community. I think we do a lot for our recruitment and retention of big business development, and I'd like to see a healthy dose of investment in our small business community as well.
Thank you. We're out of time.
Thank you.
Mr. Riley? Both the APD Community Liaison, you heard this question before, I'll restate it, and the APD District Representative programs are extremely valuable to neighborhoods. They provide mechanisms for citizens to collaborate with the city and APD to prevent and reduce crime and to identify and address systemic causes of crime in the community. The APD Community Liaison Unit has been targeted for dismantling, and the District Representatives program may be threatened with reductions as well. In this time of economic hardship, when crime rates are likely to increase, does it make sense to you to try to end or diminish these programs? Yes or no?
No.
And will you commit to protect these programs from budget cuts?
I will do everything I can to do that. And at this time, we're all going to have to be tightening our belts, and I would like to see that one preserved, and I would have to look to neighborhoods as well as law enforcement to see if we're able to do that.
Thank you. As a member of the Downtown Commission in 2007, you proposed to modify or eliminate 11 of the 30 Capitol View corridors. Why did you support a proposal that gave no advance notice to neighborhoods or planning teams affected by the proposed changes? Do you still believe that building residential high-rises within existing view corridors is necessary to encourage downtown development?
I never believed that. No, I'm glad to get the question. There was a lot of confusion about that. I am the supporter of our Capitol View corridors, and I think the legislature got it right when they created them. Unfortunately, our Texas legislature is not perfect, and in setting up in defining those view corridors, there were certain mistakes that were made. For instance, the Oakwood Cemetery has a view corridor that is defined to start 100 feet above the ground. Now, I'm as spiritual as anybody, but that was just a mistake. That was and there are other mistakes. If you look at the view corridors, there were mistakes that were made. And since the corridors were first created, there have been obstructions that have been placed in those view corridors through things like the federal building that went up downtown, through legislature's actions to allow for the expansion of the stadium and the Mueller redevelopment. The corridors remain in place. There have just been obstructions so you can't see the Capitol anyway, but you still can't develop there because of those obstructions. In other words, there are a number of technical problems that need to be fixed, and even the Heritage Society acknowledges that there are problems with those view corridors that ought to be fixed. I am committed to, I will not support or initiate any change to the Capitol View corridors that are not supported by the Heritage Society, and the Heritage Society knows that, and we need to be working on that cooperatively. And I did, yeah.
Your time's up. Does the the mistakes made by the legislature, explain your proposal to modify or eliminate 11 of the 30 Capitol View corridors. 10 seconds.
And the problem is that I'm interested in good government, and sometimes good government and good politics don't mesh very well together. No, I'm not in favor of eliminating the Capitol
No, the
View
question
corridors.
is, do the legislature's mistakes explain your vote to eliminate 11 of the 30 corridors?
No, I did not vote to eliminate 11 of the 30 corridors. And I'm happy to discuss that in more length, in more detail. But no, I'm not in favor of eliminating any of the view corridors, any of the view corridors.
We want you to describe what you would like to see as the boundaries for downtown. Do you believe that high-rise buildings are appropriate outside of these boundaries and adjacent to residential neighborhoods?
In general, no. There are some exceptions around transit-oriented developments where some additional density is appropriate. It is going to be vastly more responsible, environmentally responsible, to actually allow some additional high-rises at transit-oriented developments where people can access those transit lines. In general, no, I believe that the 60-foot height limit for our core transit corridors is something that we ought to be able to live with. I think the corridors offer a lot of promise in terms of accommodating additional density within that 60-foot height limit, and even that you won't even be able to go up to 60 feet everywhere because we've got compatibility requirements as well.
I'm going to redirect you to the question, which is for you to describe what you want to see as the boundaries for downtown.
The boundaries for downtown, as we've known for years, are Town Lake to MLK and Lamar to I-35.
Thank you. Given your experience on the Planning Commission and other city commissions and boards, what level and manner of community participation did you find most persuasive and effective? If elected to City Council, what changes do you propose to guarantee greater and more effective community participation?
There are all kinds of community participation that are valuable. I think our participation on boards is one that is very valuable and would be even more valuable if we would actually take our boards and commissions more seriously. I think we can make a lot of progress on that. I also think neighborhood planning could offer a great way for people to help get involved in the neighborhoods. I don't think it's really done very well at that in recent years. I think we could revamp the neighborhood planning program to offer more to neighborhoods and to actually reward participation and afford neighborhood residents more of an opportunity to define the future for their own neighborhoods.
Let me ask you the first part of that question again. What level and manner of community participation, that's us, did you find most persuasive and effective?
I guess I really appreciated those people who would not only show up at planning commission meetings, but would actually contact us in advance. I always appreciated when someone would actually, when a resident in the neighborhood would actually ask to get together, would actually ask to meet with me in advance of a planning commission hearing. And I challenge anyone to find anybody who I refused to meet with. I was always glad to meet with anyone, especially neighborhood residents, to talk about a case in advance of a planning commission hearing. And I found that very, very helpful to help me come up to speed before people had their 3 minutes at the actual hearing.
You've represented to ANC that you will support codifying and reinstating the maximum height limits from the 1986 Waterfront Overlay Ordinance and will oppose any rezonings violating that intent. Will you support codifying the maximum height limits so they apply to PUD districts and Planned Development Area Combining Districts? Quick answer.
No.
The Lakeshore Subdistrict of the Waterfront Overlay had a maximum height of 60 feet. Will you oppose granting heights above 60 feet for the portion of the South Shore District PUD that is in the Lakeshore Subdistrict of the Waterfront Overlay?
I support setting down rules and then sticking with them. My understanding is that there is some disagreement within the task force between the majority and the minority report as to how much latitude should be afforded. Sometimes there are occasions, as we saw with the CWS side, I thought the ANC did incredibly positive work to actually arrive at a really good resolution on that. And it involved something that actually went beyond the original height limits in the waterfront overlay. And if that's something that we want to continue to allow in the future, then I would be supportive of that as long as we nail it down in the ordinance in advance. We just need to get the ordinance laid down and then follow it.
Do you have, in the ordinance, will you support a 60-foot maximum height?
If that's what I support getting the ordinance in place, and if that's the recommendation, and yes, that's.
So you want to wait until there's discussion? If you don't have a personal...
I want our community to have a discussion about whether we want to allow the kind of negotiations that ANC carried out with the CWS case to provide that to serve the purpose of the overlay. We can in some cases we might allow some flexibility if we get significant community benefits like public access along the waterfront. If that means some flexibility on the 60-foot limit, and we agree as a community that we want to allow that in the future, then I would support that result.
You said you believe in the equitable distribution of affordable housing throughout the city. Does that include the downtown area?
Absolutely.
Will you support building affordable housing at the Green Water Treatment Plant and other city-owned properties downtown?
Absolutely.
What affordability levels would you support for downtown city-owned properties?
Downtown affordability is a real challenge, and we have been working on it for years, and we still don't have a good answer to it. I mean, I could tell you I like 80% at 20% at 80% of MFI or some other numbers like that. I honestly don't know what's going to work. I think the Community Land Trust offers some real promise. I think once we get authorization to use our $55 million in affordable housing bond funds for a community land trust, I'd like to see some of that go to securing long-term affordable units for downtown as well as other neighborhoods. That's one model that could work well. I think my own neighborhood, the Northwest District, offers some real promise since it has lower height limits thanks to the Capital View corridors, which I appreciate because it will allow us to get more affordable housing in that northwest part of downtown. But it's going to require a lot of creative efforts, and I can't tell you a number. I know it's a problem that we need to continue working seriously on with the whole community, especially the affordable housing community, in order to figure out this very difficult problem with how we get affordable housing downtown.
You said the VMU ordinance needs some work.
Absolutely.
What specifically would you do to improve the VMU ordinance?
You know, when that went into effect, I think everybody involved was just so exhausted by the whole process that they knew there were problems, but they said, let's just put it in and come back in a year. And unfortunately, when a year rolled around, campaign season was already underway, and there was no good workable way to actually get to that. We all know that there are real problems with that, and it extends to every little thing. I mean, the pressure's been eased a little bit just because we haven't seen as much development as we were seeing there for a while. But we know there are problems, and I can tell you exactly what they are. I would want to talk to neighbors who are around VMU projects. I would want to talk to the handful of applicants who have actually been through it and see how we've done over the course of the year, and find out what the problems have been, and then work collaboratively with both neighborhood residents and the actual developers to arrive at fixes for those problems.
Should the comprehensive plan establish firm criteria for zoning?
But the comprehensive plan does need to establish parameters for the citywide expectations for every neighborhood. For instance, I think every neighborhood should be expected to accommodate some affordable housing. Every neighborhood should be expected to allow for some transit. Every neighborhood should be expected to accommodate some additional population growth over time. And it's up to the comprehensive plan to set out those parameters in broad terms so that as individual neighborhoods enter the neighborhood planning process, they know exactly what the whole city is expecting of them. And as long as they meet those parameters, then they should be afforded latitude to set their own agendas.
So if those parameters are established in a comprehensive plan, would you consider only rezonings that are consistent with those criteria?
I'm not sure I understand. I think that the citywide parameters should be the things that we expect of every city. I actually am not a fan of dealing with zoning in neighborhood plans. I think generally when neighborhoods go into the neighborhood planning process, if you ask folks in neighborhoods, that my experience is zoning is not at the top of the list for most people. The regular folks in neighborhoods, they have an awful lot of concerns that relate to things like public safety and the garbage pickup, education. There are a whole host of issues about their neighborhood, parks, open space, a whole list of things that don't necessarily relate to zoning. And what they find is they get forced into, since our neighborhood planning is lodged within the neighborhood planning and zoning department, they are expected to speak this language of zoning acronyms, and frankly, a lot of people find it very off-putting and frustrating when they run into the future land use map, which is constrained by existing zoning. I think the whole emphasis on zoning is actually unfortunate, and unless a neighborhood is really intent on addressing zoning, I would not expect a neighborhood to be required to work on zoning in the neighborhood plan.
Your opponent lays out a plan for multiple scenarios of growth and suggests that growth management should be determined in part by our community values and how we desire to grow and live. Your answer assumes a given growth rate and suggests we simply need to be ready for that growth. What would be the impact to the comprehensive plan if the growth rate you project is not correct?
Well, I don't mean to suggest that we should be rigid in mandating a particular level of growth. I do think we need to look carefully at what our existing resources are and make sure that over time we will be able to meet any population growth that we can reasonably expect within our existing resources. And that's going to require careful planning on issues like water, for instance. We need to make sure that our water supply is going to be adequate to meet population growth. As much as it's not, and just to do that planning is not to say that we're mandating that we double our population every 20 years, as we have been since World War II. But it's just a realistic approach of being prepared for that eventuality, since it has been happening. I think we ought to be ready for a continued growth pattern without necessarily requiring it or encouraging it to take place. We do need to be prepared for it.
Do you believe that managing growth according to community values has any place in the comprehensive plan? Or do you believe that the passive approach reflected in your answer is more appropriate? And if so, why?
I don't mean to suggest any kind of passive approach. I do think managing growth is great, and everything we do in the comprehensive plan needs to be based on community values. I do think that under Texas law, there are real limits on our ability to limit our urban growth. We can't just put up a wall at the edge of the city and say no growth beyond this, because we don't have the authority under state law to do that. We need to be ready for additional population growth. And what we can do is integrate community values in the way that we handle the growth that we can reasonably anticipate, and that's where we need to be focusing our efforts. We need to make sure that the population growth that we can reasonably expect is accommodated in a way that is friendly to neighborhoods and works for our city and is environmentally responsible.
During your campaign, you've stated that you learned a great deal since serving on the Planning Commission. In retrospect, what type of mistakes did you make, and how would you handle those differently if you were still on the Planning Commission?
I think I would have spoken up more vigorously at the time. There was one very discrete moment of time when there was a change in the neighborhood planning process, and I know y'all who have been around a while probably remember it, but it was under Toby Futrell when she looked at the progress we were making in the early neighborhood plans, and she decided that those plans were taking too long, and we weren't meeting the targets that we had expected to meet of getting all the central city neighborhoods planned within 5 years. We weren't on track to do that. And so Toby, under our manager Futrell, the whole process was shortened, and the effect of it was to shift authority to staff. And it was a very significant point in time. And looking back on it, I realized how significant it was. What we saw at that point was, instead of having neighborhoods coming to us and saying, pass our plan, as they had with the early neighborhood plans, they were coming to us saying, this isn't our plan. And I think if I had been looking back on it, if knowing what I know now, I think I would have been more active in speaking up and saying at that moment in time and saying, wait a minute, this is going to be a disaster. Neighborhoods need to be empowered to develop their own plans, and this is a serious mistake because it resulted in a lot of frustration and a lot of misery on the part of a lot of neighborhoods. And I wish we had seen that at the moment it happened for all its implications.
You heard the federal stimulus funds question, $1.7 million. How do you think these funds could best be used to address Austin's rising crime rates?
I think, frankly, education. I was glad to see a significant amount of the stimulus funding go towards education. We need. There's an awful lot of work we need to do for Austin schools, and I think that is the single most, in terms of bang for the buck on addressing crime. I think that's probably the single best thing we can do is work on not just necessarily pouring money into the same school system that we have now, but trying some innovative approaches that will help save our schools, that will help, that are actually, and there are folks out there in the community right now who are trying new approaches and actually getting some very positive results on a limited basis. And I would support some stimulus funding going to projects like that can actually achieve some real success at turning around the problems we've got in our schools.
You stated you would support a valid petition unless there was an owner-opposed historic zoning case or some equally compelling citywide interest. Please give examples of what you would consider a compelling citywide interest.
I can think of a situation like we have a real issue with reentry. We have a frighteningly large portion of our current population that is incarcerated, and we haven't, as a society, dealt adequately with how to move past that, how people can enter the society after that. Now, so just picture it. Suppose we had no facilities like that, no reentry facilities in the city, and we needed some facility somewhere. And we found what seemed to be a good location, but some immediate neighbors, understandably, were concerned about it. Now, I think in a case like that, where if we just went with a neighborhood petition in every case, then what we would wind up, I'm not sure where those people would go. I mean, what neighborhood in the city would be eager to get that? And yet, we as a community know that that's a responsibility we need to deal with. By and large, I have seen neighborhoods understanding that and being willing to accept things. And the only time they've complained about things like that is when they're unfairly distributed. And so that's why it hasn't been more of a problem than it has.
We're out of time. Thank you both very much.